Okay, this is Howard Nema, and you are watching Truth Talk News on truthbroadcastnetwork.com. Fantastic day. We're having a wonderful display of fireworks outside my house here, and it's really nice. We can't forget that tomorrow is the 4th of July. Sorry, a little winded because I was just outside chatting with my neighbors, and they're shooting off some fireworks. I think it's great. That's what freedom's all about. I mean, that's really what it is all about. Whew. All right, let me catch my breath. Okay, so we have an amazing show tonight, incredible topic that is very underscored yet completely in the subtext, lost in the shuffle, lost in the bureaucracy, and worse, another cog in the wheel of the New World Order, another cog that's making this collectivism ever more sinister, going after estates through conservatorships, going after for various people that are either incompetent mentally or they have problems where they're physically unable to take care of themselves. And it's just one of the most horrific things to have to deal with as a human being, as a father, as a parent, as a family member of someone who might be suffering from disabilities, and then the problems that ensue from that need not to have the bureaucracy and the greed of evil, manipulative, agenda-driven. I don't even know what to call them. It's all about the money and siphoning the money. It all ties into what's going on now with Obamacare, and I'm hoping to raise the awareness to this issue of the conservatorships. And it's not just in here in my home state of Connecticut, but terrible cases are happening in California with Dr. Robert Fettgather. And he is our guest tonight with Janet Phelan. And I would like to introduce Janet Phelan, investigative journalist who has written articles on this problem, and we're trying to help raise awareness to what's going on here. Now, obviously, I've read the articles, but I don't have the insight. So please, Janet and Dr. Robert Fettgather, please, let's talk about David and talk about how this whole thing happened, and from your perspective, and you guys have the floor.
I'd just like to jump in for a moment and define what a conservatorship is, because I think a lot of people still don't even know. The mainstream media is hardly covering this grave revocation of rights that happens in conservatorship proceedings. So I'd like to just quickly let the listening audience give them sort of a thumbnail. Conservatorships are also called adult guardianships, and they are initiated through court proceedings generally when there are allegations that a person is becoming incompetent or is incompetent, and there is almost no standard of proof necessary. So upon hearing these allegations, a probate judge, because these proceedings do generally take place in probate court, will appoint a guardian or a conservator to take care of a person.
So Janet, I don't want to interrupt you. So what basically you're saying is that, so if possibly there were like corrupt influences between these types of people, that there could be a serious problem here.
Well, the serious problem comes, basically there are two aspects to it as I see it. One of the aspects is the corrupting nature of power and control. So you can see where you have total control over what a person does, where they live, whether they're allowed to see family. And in the case of conservatorships of a state, you have total control over the person's finances. So, Howard, let's say if I control you, I've got all your money, um, and I'm a stranger, right? These professional conservators and guardians are strangers. They're not,
And
we're not. Right.
That's right.
We're
And
not talking about family members who may love somebody. So
exactly,
I
they're
got all your
saying you
money,
can't
and
see
I
your
can.
own family member or use your judgment for your family member because they've been, I mean, basically purchased by the state. What if enslaved by the state? I mean, what would you
Enslaved by the state. This is
what
a
could you
matter of
call it?
Well, this is a matter of human property, because when a person goes under a conservatorship, they lose all their rights. And they lose the right to contract, they lose the right to go to court, they lose the right to hire an attorney to contest the conservatorship, and they lose generally all access to their money. So, that sort of frames the issue as to the potential here for a grave harm and injustice. And I would really like to hear Dr. Fettgather start to tell us, what happened to his son David, who was, born with some disabilities. So, Dr. Fettgather, please do tell
Well,
us.
yeah, Howard, thank you, and Janet, again, thank you very much, and happy Independence Day to you both and all the listeners. Independence Day is a bittersweet time for me now and for my son David because he lost his independence in 2005. Um, at that time, and unbeknownst to me, under the auspices of what's called a regional center, which is yet another governmental agency that oversees people with disabilities, David signed on the dotted line with a state social worker, Herman Kofi. David cannot read, he cannot write. He had just turned 18. And so, in signing a form, he was placed into a slum home, a care home, and out of my control, and was basically at that point a captive of the state. I was shocked. I was appalled. Even though I'm a psychologist and I've worked with disabilities for 10 years before my son was born, I had no idea that could happen. So Janet gave a great introduction to guardians or conservators because I sought a guardian for help. In fact, I was told by the state that my son needed to be conserved because he was 18. And so I was introduced to a professional fiduciary, Kay Kerrigan, who actually was a former employee of the regional center. It's a very close knit bunch
But doctor,
there in
isn't that a
Sacramento,
lie?
California.
Isn't that a lie though, doctor? Isn't that a lie that you don't have to do this? Isn't that the point that they sort of railroaded you to believe that you had to do this? Similarly to the way
Well,
they
Janet actually,
go ahead.
Janet actually, Janet has done some due diligence and made some phone calls to the Department of Developmental Services, and it is not true, although it was presented to me as a fact. And so I met with this guardian, this conservator, and pled my son's case, and I signed. I admit it. I guess like a lot of family members do, believing that she would do, and I'm quoting, what is best for David, and that was
Yeah,
all
right.
I could ask.
It's
And
similar to the doctors, and I mean, I'm again, I have a strong anti-vaccine, and this New World Order is a big part of the show and the audience that listens to it, and this is a segment of it, absolutely. But this is exactly the same Hegelian type dialectic, the same control about the vaccines. Now we're going to take care of your children, we're going to do everything for you, but meanwhile they milk you. They take away all your parental rights. They take away any estate that might have been accumulated for the child, right? They do anything that they can to control the situation and take away your rights, which is the same thing with, well, take the vaccines because in the schools, and when you go to your doctor, and if you refuse the vaccine, they're going to say, well, they're going to give you a problem, and it's not true. It's a lie. It's another lie. You don't have to vaccinate your children. There's no law. It is not a law. They want you to mandate this, like they want to mandate your children being put into the state. It is all part of this disgusting thing that I fight against. And I'm sorry, I am angry because I work with somebody who has a business, another business for adult daycare, and he deals with people that have adult disabilities, learning disabilities, and such. And and it's unbelievable that they could do this to people just because they're in a situation where they're vulnerable, and they use their vulnerability, they use this against them. They use their fear tactics. It's like big pharma, the whole medical mafia, scaring you to do all these horrific things because you might get this, you might do that. It's just disgusting. And now your own children. Anyway, I'm sorry, I was just ranting, I apologize, but because really,
Yeah, I just wanted.
let's talk
Sorry.
about David. I'll go ahead,
Can I
Janet.
just say something real quick? Yeah,
Please.
just real quickly, I want to say they
Sure.
not only use your vulnerability, but they use your love, because in the case of someone trying to protect a disabled son or somebody trying to protect an elderly parent, you are motivated by love. You want the best for the person you love. And in trots the guardian, all smarmy and playing on your vulnerability and your concern for your loved one, and with no good intentions whatsoever. So I just wanted to say that. And yeah, let's hear from Dr. Fettgather as to what
Well,
happened there.
and I thank you both, and the emotions of anger and love really play in. So you both hit respective nails on the head for me. All I ever wanted and want to this day in my love for David is his independence and his freedom, and yet my love for him was deeply taken advantage of. And I guess it's fair to say that being a psychologist is no advantage. I believed in people, and I believed in my own attorney, who I eventually hired. I believed in a fight that cost me over $100,000, and it was in the end all lost. David is still to this day, after a 7-year battle, owned, as Janet said so perfectly and eloquently, by the state. He is owned by a guardian. And it's not just David. It is a sort of modern form of enslavement of person and property.
It is. But
And
this is
so,
part of the conditioning. This is just one stage. Listen, Hitler did the same thing. I know. I didn't really want to jump into Hitler like right away, but oh my God, I get chills when I see what's going on. This is the eugenics that the Nazis used, the same tactics. They did the same thing. Isn't that true, Janet? Isn't this very similar to the?
Yes, it is. And actually, a lot of people don't know that the very first um, uh, eugenics program launched by Hitler was not against Jehovah's Witnesses or Jews or communists. It was against the disabled, the elderly and disabled. And it was called the T4 program. And I think that, I remember when the first George Bush was talking about, kinder, gentler. Well, what we have, I think, is a kinder, gentler T4 program that is actually, brutal and anguishing to those who actually, love their children or love their elderly parent. And I think what is so disturbing about Dr. Fettgather's story is that in all of his attempts to basically advocate for his son, he has now become a target, a major target by the state of California. And I'd really like to hear from him, as to how that eventuated and what they have now done to him.
well, thank you, Janet. And this real story is David's story, but it now, in a way, has become my story too, because David really does not have a voice for himself. I understand him, but only a very few close to him do, and so he needs a voice, and I became that voice. And so, having done it for several decades, I began working with the disabled in 1976, 10 years before David was born. So, it's very familiar to me to fight for their rights. And so I began to fight for David's rights, and I was immediately hit by people in the probate court, which I expected. And what I did not expect was to be hit as I continued my launch last year for David's right. I spoke out at an assemblyman's town hall meeting on behalf of David. This assemblyman had ignored David's rights, even though he claims to be a champion of the disabled. I went to David's regional center, and they claimed to be the caregivers of David. And there I was actually with my fiance, and I was physically accosted and thrown out. I was subject to all kinds of brutal statements, and it was absolutely horrendous. The police, although I made a report, did nothing. And about 2 weeks later, after my attempts to advocate for my son, the psychology board, which governs my license, contacted me and said there were complaints against my license, which
Really?
shocked me because I've been a psychologist for 22 years without a complaint. And the psychology board, which in California operates under the same auspices as the Consumer Affairs Department, which also, by the way, governs conservators. So the same oversight, Consumer Affairs oversees conservators, and by the way, does little to nothing. Janet can speak to that. Well, I was contacted by my board related to the Consumer Affairs, the psychology board, and they headed after me like a vigilante committee. And I was investigated and ramrodded, and it's been a nightmare. So my son's nightmare became my nightmare. I was eventually put under charges by the California Board of Psychology under the Department of Consumer Affairs. I was ordered to take a psychiatric exam, even though there's no evidence that I ought to take a psychiatric exam. I refused to do it on the principles about psychiatric exams that apply not just in this country but across the world. It was a forced psychiatric exam. I refused. I had my attorney support me on that refusal, and so the board came after me again, and we went to a trial, which was a one-day trial. In that trial, my attorney expected to put forth evidence that there was no reason to compel a psychiatric exam. The judge ruled that we could not present any evidence whatsoever. And the courtroom ruling was narrowed down to, did Dr. Fettgather refuse to sit for a court-ordered psychiatric exam? I said, yes, I refuse. And I was found guilty. And the news just came down today that my license has been ordered to be revoked.
Oh, my God.
So that's the punishment for speaking up.
I'd just like to add in for a moment. There was a very peculiar matter about these charges against him by the state psychology board, because the board is mandated to investigate consumer complaints. However, it appeared that the complaints against Dr. Fettgather were from former employees in his psychology business. So the Department of Consumer Affairs sort of stepped away from their mandate, which is to, if a client, for example, had a complaint, they would go, a client of a psychologist would go to the Consumer Affairs Board and make the complaint. But they have no business inserting themselves in what is a colleague or coworker situation. And in the case of Dr. Fettgather, he was the employer. So there's questionable, really questionable behavior by the State Psychology Board in even taking up this matter. But it got worse because the Dr. Fettgather was completely denied his right to due process. If someone makes allegations against you, the way that even administrative law proceedings work, and he was in an administrative law proceeding in Sacramento, the way that these work is that you get to have it, your day in court to confront the charges and to say, no, this isn't true. But Dr. Fettgather didn't have that opportunity. This was a total railroad. And just to bring up, the issue, I want to make sure that that the listening audience can understand that these psychology or psychiatry examinations are really very problematic, because on the basis of of such an examination, a person can lose all their rights. And it's happened and happening now, in manner in to a degree which is almost unbelievable. Psychiatrists have police powers.
Well,
All
that's the
they
whole.
have to
It's
do
part
is
of the
say,
police state. It's part of this whole thing. They
exactly,
are literally
exactly, and
replaying the Nazi playbook here.
yes, and also to an extent the Soviet one,
Yes, no,
off to the
it's
gulag.
definitely
You're
a hybrid.
crazy, off to the
Yes,
gulag. So
yes, off to the gulag.
I just want to, there are a number of activists and whistleblowers who have faced an extreme amount of abuse by the quote unquote mental health system, because all that they have to do is say, oh, we think you're not competent. They can put you under a conservatorship, or they can send you off to a hospital. And so I think Dr. Fettgather was very astute in refusing this exam, because it was obvious that a railroad was in. And I want to mention something, because I done some promo for the show, and I got an email from one of my respondents who has been battling elder abuse and conservatorship abuse for a very long time, and has become very outspoken about this. And at one point, they were trying to railroad him into, a similar sort of construct with anger management. And once again, as soon as they get you in the mental health system, they can, they can have their way with you. And this gentleman, whose name is Tom Fields, who's well known to many in the, the guardianship reform movement, we'll just call it that, as a very outspoken and very genteel sort of, advocate. In an email he sent me today, he went through 20 prospective anger management counselors until he found one who would actually, would give him a clean evaluation, which is that, there's nothing wrong with this guy. But we have so much complicity going on in the mental health system now, in terms of using mental health as a weapon against people, using the mental health system as a weapon against people.
Well,
And I think that Dr. Fettgather was very smart in refusing to be so railroaded.
yes, absolutely. And again, let's get back to David, because let's talk about David and what they've done to David, how this has affected David, and what it's done for what it's done to him, and how it's going to affect his future. Because listen, I'm a parent too, and we're mortals, and your children you're supposed to at least outlive you. And you have to, in your case, of course, you have other provisions that need to be made, and you have a eugenics system. I mean, I can't call it anything other than a Nazi system, taking care of your child, saying you have no rights. So please just speak to what you need to, and let's go further on that, Doctor.
Well, David, yeah, thank you. Because it has certainly become a nightmare for me, and the nightmare for David has been 7 years long, and so he is basically, and it's not unique to David, Howard. Many people with developmental disabilities lose their rights. They are incarcerated. At one point, they were incarcerated in state hospitals, and they still are to some degree. There's been wonderful journalism on this on East and West Coast. The New York Times published a series of articles on state-sanctioned abuse in institutions in New York State, and also Ryan Gabrielson on the West Coast just came out with a nice for the Bay Citizen, a great bit of journalism showing abuse and even murder in state hospitals in California. So whether it's in a state hospital or now it's been farmed out to board and care, as it was with people with mental illness, where it's even less well controlled and more subject to abuse, it's really gotten out of control. So David is in a home and he's kept there. The state profits from David staying in the home. Guardian works for the state and keeps David in the home, and there he is incarcerated. We're allowed to see him, and this is only because of the advocacy that I have spoken to you about twice a month. And so, those are really great times. But for most of David's life, he lives in this home. He goes to bed at 5:30 p.m. When the sun's still out. He goes to really custodial care, whereby taxpayers pay a lot of money for people with disabilities and I've seen it, I've watched it for 30 years, to sit and put together puzzle pieces where all the puzzles are not there, sit in front of computers that are not even turned on. They page endlessly through magazines, and they become really shells of themselves. That is my son's life.
Oh my
and he is
God!
cleaned and polished. I wrote an article on this.
It's just unbelievable. Go
I
ahead.
wrote
I'm
an
sorry.
article on this. He's cleaned and polished for visitors, so that if a guardian knows a visitor's coming or there's going to be some sort of survey, that they will clean and polish David. They will make sure that he looks good and that there is the facade of a quote-unquote rehabilitation program going on around him. But that kind of facade has been around for 40 or 50 years, the years of so-called institutional reform in this country. There is no reform. It's just all make-believe. And the people that are the victims, like my son, have no voices to speak up. And then when family members do, as I have, I am billed for it. I think I mentioned this to Janet that last time I spoke on radio, I was monitored by my son's court-appointed attorney. So in this whole guardian matrix, there's a bunch of profiteers. There are guardians and there are attorneys, and so my son actually has a court-appointed attorney who has sold him down the river. And so I received a bill from his attorney, Lynette Anderson, for listening to my last broadcast.
Huh.
And it literally says, listening to Dr. Fettgather's broadcast, and she sent me a bill for her time.
Holy God in heaven. What unbelievable audacity. Unreal. Unbelievable.
They work with impunity, and it's god awful for again so many Davids and so many family members.
It's really such a shame. And from what I've read here, it's basically, again, they're in cahoots. The court system is sort of like it's just like the prison system that we have. The same in certain areas and certain connections that they have to the courts, and judges have been caught in doing this. It isn't anything new. Oh my God!
It's not. It's really a cottage industry has sprung up around this court system, and the people within it all know each other. They work together. The conservators know the attorneys, know the court investigators, know the judges, and they know the regional centers, and they know the politicians, and they all know each other. And they are careerists. They make their money off of commodities, and the commodities are people with disabilities like my son. And for those of us who are family members, and I'm not the only one, if we do speak up, the retaliation is harsh.
Yes, it is. And you've been attacked. They're trying to take your license away to practice psychology.
Oh, they've taken it away. They took it away. It's
Well,
been revoked.
it was.
Yeah, as of today, he found out.
Yeah, actually the court, the administrative law court, which is a fairly low level court, based on no trial, judge ordered revocation of my license, and also it's fining me $15,000 to pay for the investigation, the very corrupt investigation into me. The
Oh my
investigator
God.
who was assigned to this case spent months compiling with my ex-employees a stack of lies that is several inches thick. And going through those lies was disgusting for me. And it is my ex-employees, and there was a very bitter business dispute back in 2010 that is the genesis for all this. But the BCA, the board investigator, just went fishing, and he found 4 embittered ex-employees who said anything, and they did. They said all kinds of horrible things, lies about me, and so there were many hours that the investigator spent putting together this case.
Wow.
Then it went to a psychologist, because I was required to be interviewed by a psychologist, and that several-hour debacle. This guy came up with a decision, as I sat there with my attorney, that he felt that I was mentally ill, and actually that I was cognitively impaired. Even though we provided an affidavit from my physician, and I have a world-class physician. I have a physician and a neurologist. Both provided affidavits, not only that I'm in sound health, but they've actually referred patients to me. And yet, this psychologist, in a great example of psychiatric assault, found me to be mentally incompetent. And so that decision went to the court, was adopted, and came down. So that's why I refused to take the psychiatric exam, because after the investigator, followed by the psychological interview, I knew the deck was completely stacked, and so I refused to be certified incompetent by a board-appointed psychiatrist. And
Doctor,
it cost me my license.
Doctor, I just want to say very quickly that Dr. Fettgather didn't even get to see the actual charges against him until 4 days before the hearing. There was no time to prepare. The state had all of this ready, I believe it was last August, but it was only even given to his attorney 4 days before the hearing. And then, they go into the hearing to find out that even with, only 4 days to prepare, they're not going to be allowed to put on a case. The only issue on the table was, are you going to take the psych eval or not? So, the deprivation of due process, simply the regulations that are supposed to govern our proceedings in court were completely violated in this case.
Absolutely. It's unbelievable. And it's so obvious, but, I can't believe that there's nobody talking about this. That I mean, the press are obviously there's influence there that's keeping this from being hushed up in the press. I mean that seems to be something that we don't see in the mainstream news. I mean, I can understand what I talk about not being in mainstream news, but this is something that's happening directly in every single small community in America to people of that have this type of a situation. So how can you speak to that? I mean, that's just unbelievable, right?
Well,
Well,
Howard, I'd like to say that when I began in my profession back in the 70s, uh, I was a psychiatric technician, which is really starting at the bottom rung, licensed by the state of California, and I was part of the network against psychiatric assault. In those days, and the 70s were a different time. There was already great political awareness about the issue of psychiatric assault against people who suffer from mental illness and a variety of different situations. So, all that's happened over the intervening 40 years is that the state has gotten more clever. We were in those days fighting very egregious and awful cases of psychiatric assault. Now, and this is just my observation, I don't know what Janet would say, but I think when it comes to psychiatric assault today, the state is far more clever, and that's why, at least one reason why, that it doesn't seem to make it into the press, because at first glance, it looks like everything's in order. These people have gotten so good, and it takes a much deeper look into the whole situation. I told my attorney when I first got involved in probate misconduct, I said, "What will be believed, a complicated truth or a simple lie?" And she insisted that the complicated truth would be believed. But $100,000 later, I found out that simple lies play well in probate court, and they play well in the popular press, with exceptions. And I mentioned a couple of the exceptions. This show is certainly a great exception in media, and we had a wonderful case that broke in our San Jose Mercury News about probate abuse. But these are great exceptions.
Wow. They really are. We have to get more people out there. Again, we try to spread all this information as best we can to everybody. There are many networks that I haven't really plugged the folks that are helping us, and I'm just going to do that right now. I want to thank Harry Link, truthbroadcastnetwork.com, and Pam Suggs, UnitedTruthSeekers.com. Roger Landria, We the People Network. That's WTPnetwork.com. Really gets us going out here. And of course, Bobby K at ProjectFreedom.ws, which is Project Freedom Radio, which streams on 55 affiliates worldwide. So we do have a long reach here. And I appreciate everybody working so hard to try to get quality information out, because what they do is they squash all the truth so that it fits to their agenda. And in this case, their agenda is eugenics. So not only are they trying to steal whatever wealth they can from you by fighting this and attacking you, but they're stealing whatever you can leave to your son for his own needs, which now are actually, they would just take anyway because you don't have any right to help him. And they don't have any right to, to help you, and they can leave you penniless, and it's okay. The state will take care of him in this like very like incredibly Nazi like, surroundings. I just can't even believe this is America anymore, and this is just one example, but look at what's happened.
I'd like to say something about this retaliation, because the retaliation that Dr. Fettgather has experience has been inflicted upon him in this case it is not unique. I just wanted to mention a couple of other cases that I know of where there's been enormous retaliation. Robert Gettinger has whose mother went under a conservatorship, and also in the state of California. He was attempting to do some organizing and posting on the web, and said some, shall we say, unfavorable things about judges. And Robert Gettinger, who is a former police officer himself, was arrested in the middle of the night by a SWAT team.
Oh,
And he was brought into custody by a SWAT team.
how
A couple
nice.
days later, listen, it gets better. A couple
Oh,
days later, he's released because the district attorney refused to file charges against him, saying he hadn't violated any laws.
of course he didn't.
Nevertheless, they kept his computers for a very long time. There's also Jeannie Tanaka, who herself is an attorney with the state of California, and she has been fighting for her mother, Jean Tanaka. Both Tanakas, Jean and Jeannie, mother and daughter, were actually held in those internment camps during World War II when they were rounding up the Japanese Americans and sticking them in camps in America. So, fast forward, decades later, and Jeannie's an attorney, and her mom's getting old, and Jeannie Tanaka was falsely brought into custody by the Beverly Hills police after the conservator called them and knowingly submitted a false police report saying that Jeannie Tanaka had a restraining order against her when she did not, and the conservator knew full well she did not. So there she is visiting her mom, and she's taken away by the police in handcuffs in front of her mom. Now, these situations, there's this big situation of Dr. Robert Sarhan, who's out there in Florida. He was a medical doctor, well, no longer. He's lost that medical license, battling for his mother, who he claims was murdered by the conservator by medical negligence.
Oh, absolutely. But they
And
do this all the time. They do it in the hospitals. My own father had a bed sore that was the size of your thumbnail, and he had surgery at Yale New Haven Hospital. He was there for 7 days, and somehow this thumbnail size wound became the size of like a cantaloupe, and he ended up dying. And then no lawyer would take it because he was elderly, and there was no money in it, and it's just the way it is. He lived his life. I swear to God.
Well, elderly people are not really considered to be people. They're sort of like used up people. And once again, we have this viewpoint of people as property and people only of use if they can, if they are generating money and are part of a, workforce. But other types of people who are disabled or elderly, they are treated like wadded up Kleenex. And in the case of Dr. Sarhan, it wasn't enough, to take away his medical license and to take away, every penny he had. But they also then started to initiate child protective services against his and take away his son from him. Luckily, he has fought that, and per my understanding, at this particular time, he still has custody of his son. But and Dr. Robert Sarhan, by the way, has become quite a loud voice in the issues of guardianship reform. He has traveled to Washington, D.C., and spoken with legislators. He has addressed Occupy meetings. And so what happens is they go after his son. There are other cases like Ray Fernandez, who basically, after he got his mother out of the guardianship, he couldn't keep family services from coming over and snooping around every other day. So he took his mother out of the country to a third world country so that she could simply live out her days in peace. In these cases, these are just a few, but the sorts of retaliation and real targeting of people who try out of love and respect for a family member to protect them, the level of retaliation that people are experiencing is absolutely horrific. And I think Howard, that I'm also now out of the country. I've been out of the country for 4 years.
Yes.
And my whole issue also began with the conservatorship of my mother. So this is an issue where people who try to protect other people, people who out of love try to help a family member, end up becoming targeted as well.
I know it's absolutely awful. And in the few minutes that we have left here, I just wanted to sort of sum up, I guess, since we've been through so much information, and it's just it's again, it's such a tragic thing, and what's worse is that it's ongoing. It's consistently happening, and these are just stories that we're talking about tonight. This is something that they don't speak about. It's like all of the things that are really horrible that they don't speak of. And these things are not only horrible, but they're costing us. They're costing society as a whole because of the exorbitant costs associated with the fleecing of these people. In other words, the government is using their dime for these criminals to steal from the conservator, the people that are being conserved. I guess I don't know what the people that are under it, whatever. What I don't know what you call them, the conservatees. Is that what you call them? I don't know, but
Yes, you do. You call
Yes.
them conservatees. Yes.
conservatees. I'm just assuming that anyway. So all right. So the conservatees, they get everything milked out of them, and their families get milked because they love their families and they want to help their families, and they'll do anything for their family. And the government is paying these quote unquote professionals to care for them. Why doesn't the government be nice and have the resources to help care for these people in their own environments? Why don't they just leave them alone? Either way, it would reduce the cost. It's all, as you know, or as the beginning of the show. I know it's funny, Janet. You wrote down. I see your little things in the beginning here where you didn't hear the music because, yeah, so you wouldn't hear what we're talking about. But Robert Welch is talking about this. The government just finding ever more ways of spending money, wasting money, and in many ways causing harm and injury, like all of these mandates that they put through that are going to be horrific with this Obamacare. And this is going to affect the conservatorships, I'm sure of it. So, Doctor, if you would, just Dr. Fettgather, please give some closing thoughts on this and your opinions on what we've discussed, and maybe we can sum it all up. And then, Janet, if you'd like to make any comments, and then we'll move on from there. All right?
Thank you very much, Howard. It's been a great discussion, and Janet is virtually encyclopedic in her knowledge, and I've very much appreciated when I've had a chance to be on any kind of project with her. And as for me and my son, we're in a very dark night. You know, it's been a long 7-year journey, and it appears kind of at the end of it. The state calculated quite correctly that my reputation, which was exemplary, and my finances, which were adequate, would lead to a problem. And so I was definitely targeted to take away my reputation and my resources. And so that's where that stands as of this date. My lawyers, I have two, will file a stay. It's on the revocation. So that stay will be filed immediately so that I can continue to practice, and that it will be heard at a superior court level. And if the stay prevails, then they'll file a writ of appeal, and that will get onto the court table the facts about the very low bar for a psychiatric examination in my case. And it may, and this is, I think, low probability at this point, but it may actually allow me to retain some degree of power and some degree of my money so that I can continue to advocate for my son, which is what I want to continue to do.
Well, yes, that is the most important thing. You just got to keep up the fight, brother. And it is a fight. We're in it together because these people really are more interested in controlling everything about us and taking away from us. It really is happening. Whether or not you're fully aware, we have a collectivism that's been going on since the post-World War, and it's been getting worse and worse as these decades move forward. And only somebody who is ignorant to the past or refuses to accept or understand that we must look to the past to define our future. It's like that old adage, those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it, or something along those lines. But that said, I want to thank you guys so much. Janet Phelan, investigative journalist. Your articles have been in the Los Angeles Times, the San Bernardino County Sentinel, Santa Monica Daily Press, the Long Beach Press Telegram, all sorts of magazines and newspaper articles, all across the spectrum. And your work is excellent, and your knowledge is truth. You show clear capacity for getting out information that nobody wants people to look at. So I respect you on a highest level for that, and God bless you. And again, God bless you, Dr. Fettgather, for your fight and your personal battle with your son David. And I wish you the best too, sir.
Howard, may I say something just in the last minute or so we
Yeah,
have?
we do. We have
I
it.
would really, yeah, thank you so much. I really think that if people are concerned about what they heard today, in prior broadcasts I did with Dr. Fettgather, we gave out the phone number for the state psychology board because I do believe that they need to have some feedback from the public as to what they are doing over there. So I just want to give out the board number. To call the California State Psychology Board, you would dial, hope you have your pens there,
Yeah.
916 263 2699. And you press 0 to be connected to the receptionist and ask for Gina Bayless. She was the point person for the crucifixion of Dr. Fettgather. So once again, the number is 916 263 2699. And I urge anybody listening to this broadcast who finds, who has some sort of thoughts about what we have talked about today to call the state psychology board and express yourself. So I want to thank you so much, Howard.
Well, thank you, Janet, and again, thank you, Dr. Fettgather. Listen, tomorrow here on Truth Talk News from 9:11 to 10:11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we're gonna have Barbara Hartwell discussing the Kennebunkport experience. This is a don't miss show, ladies and gentlemen. It certainly was a pleasure. Yes, that's right. I had the pleasure this weekend of spending my time with Barbara Hartwell and with my family and in Kennebunkport, mocking the bushes and everything else. It was quite a thing, and we'll be showing some video of that. So don't miss that tomorrow here on Truth Talk News. God bless you, everybody, and I'll see you tomorrow night. And Death to the New World Order now with Harry Link here on truthbroadcastnetwork.com.